All right, so my name is George Newbery, American Homeowner Preservation. I think most of you heard me earlier. I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. Before insurance companies, there used to be in cities and towns across this country, there used to be an kind of bond between neighbors. And what would happen is that if someone's house burned down, all the other neighbors would go and help rebuild that house. And it wasn't for compensation, it was just under this understanding that in the event their house burned down, all the other neighbors would come to help. And now insurance companies have completely replaced that, but there's still a human need, a human element that I think comes across in crowdfunding a lot, that people want to help, and they want to help causes that they identify with. And I'm doing an article. I write for having to contribute to having to post, and I'm writing an article right now about GoFundMe's, people going on to GoFundMe for help because they're in foreclosure. And there's been 5,421 GoFundMe campaigns to raise money to help, and these are just families out of desperation are saying, please help me, I need money to stay in my home. And actually I contacted one of the families and interviewed them, and the story was tragic and unfortunately didn't work. Had success and failure in the same story. So a family in Texas needed $20,000. They couldn't pay their mortgage because the husband, who was a contractor, was diagnosed with cancer. And so the wife was helping him and doing all the things that go along with that, and they weren't able to keep up with their mortgage payments. So they put on a campaign, foreclosure, which a lot of people identify with. I think, how many people in this room know friends or family members who have at some point been impacted by foreclosure? That's a decent amount. And what about cancer? So significant numbers. And I think so now this GoFundMe campaign goes on there saying we need help to pay our mortgage and our other expenses while we deal with this cancer. And they raised $20,000. Now, unfortunately, it didn't come in time to save their house. So actually they were foreclosed, evicted, and they had to move to a friend's home, which is where they're staying now, and which was odd to me. They got to keep the $20,000, which I guess makes sense, but it was a question I asked, which I was kind of surprised that no matter what, they get to keep the money. But I think it points to, these are people that gave in, $10, $50, $100, $500 to help a family with no expectation of anything in return. And that's happening every day. And so now we talk about investing. Hey, not only am I going to do something good, but I'm actually going to I'm going to pay you a return. So you add both of them. And I think that's whether you're raising money for hard money loans to help improve neighborhoods or for us to help families in foreclosure, I think that's something to really recognize as you spread the word about whatever the business is not just, hey, we have the best return or the highest return or the safest return or the lowest risk return, whatever you have people identify with you and feel that whatever money they give to you is not only earning a financial return, because that isn't essential, but also that they are having an impact in some cause that they believe in. Now for issuers, so what we've done, so recognizing that's an important element of our business. It's not just to say, hey, great, look at how we did financially last month, last quarter, last year. It's also to share the stories of the families that we've impacted. It's on a regular basis. We'll send out email blasts, we'll post them on our blog, I'll write them, contribute to having to post a story about a family, whatever battle they went through, whatever led them to foreclosure, and share that story, try and share their photo, and what happened before, what led them to the crisis, and what's happened since then. And I know people read them, but I wasn't sure the impact, but I knew it worked last summer when one of our investors, we had just converted to Reg A, one of our accredited investors called me and said, hey, he accredited, he had invested with us since we started online in 2013, but once we went to Reg A, his non-accredited parents started investing with us as well. And we sent out a story, which was particularly powerful, about a family that we had assisted, and he called and said, hey, got to keep those, my mom loves that stuff, keep sending it, and that's what's driving that investment. They could look for other investments, but I think they're identifying with the cause, they're identifying with the people that we're impacting, and so that I find extremely important, and I think everybody should recognize that for the value that it can bring to whatever undertakings you're involved with. Now, the financial returns, our financial returns, I'm proud of them. We did file our audit, and our attorney gave me permission to share, because I guess it's filed on the SEC's website as of last week. Our return last year for the second half of 2016, when we were operating, was 39.7%. That was our annualized return, so a very high return. We pay the first 12% to investors. Now, that return inevitably will go down. When we buy pools of mortgages, the earliest ones we resolve are the ones with the greatest return. If we buy a mortgage for $20,000, the home's worth $50,000, and the people say, I'll give you a deed in lieu, we sell that home, we net $40,000, we've doubled our money in a few months, and that is a tremendous return. Now, counter that with the ones that will resolve later on, which may take, because maybe the homeowner's passed away, and it could take a year or two in litigation to resolve, those will have lower returns. So the returns will drop. But nevertheless, historically, we've generated in the 20s and the 30s, and we pay the first 12% to investors. And some investors say, oh, could you pay us more? And it's, I think the right perspective, and some investors say, well, if you're getting 39 or 29 or 20, I know I'm getting my 12, and so they can take comfort in that. If they, if we're making 13 and they're getting 12, the longevity of the business would be called into question. And the reality is, here's how we structured our business, because I always look at Wall Street and kind of try to do what they don't do. One thing we do, which Wall Street does, is when they created these mortgage-backed securities, they would put all the loans in a trust. So when you saw these foreclosures, it would be Deutsche Bank as trustee for XYZ, or Bank of America as trustee for. So all our loans, we purchase them into a trust. And the trust, it's American Homeowner Preservation Trust, but all the loans are vested U.S. Bank Trust, National Association as trustee for American Homeowner Preservation Trust. And it gives, as we hope to scale, it gives some institutional safeguards, such as if we were ever mismanaging the trustee, we could be replaced and whatnot. So there's some institutional safeguards that are in there, which I think drove the Wall Street formation of this structure, which is very, very good. But and actually, I forgot what the bad thing Wall Street did, but there were a lot. But here, no, the bad thing that I think Wall Street did is they often front-loaded their fees. If they created a mortgage-backed security, oftentimes they would make their money when they originated and securitized it, and it was off, and their risk was gone. And now it's for the investors to figure out. If the investors make money, great. If they don't make money, well, we already made ours. So we structured ours in a different way. We make, first 12% goes to investors. We get a 2% management fee. We pay all expenses. Any extra money is reinvested. We buy more mortgages. The life of our fund is 5 years. So in the more or less, sometime in the third year, we'll stop buying and we'll start returning capital in a lumpy fashion over the last 2 or so years to investors. Our goal is that in the 60th month, all investors have received all their capital back, a 12% return, and whatever's left would be ours. And so hopefully there's millions and millions of dollars worth of assets at the end. If we do a great job, there will be. If we don't do a good job, there could be very little. But it's backloaded, and our success is really, we're rewarded if we're successful. One other thing that has helped, and I haven't seen many other funds do this yet, we had an investor a couple of years ago when we did a 506c, and he said, hey, I buy apartment buildings, I'm not finding much, it's a strong market, I'm not finding many good opportunities, so I have all this money sitting at the bank earning very, very little, 1% or so, and I have this investment with you. How about this? If I take the money that's in the bank and invest it with you, could you agree that if I did find a great deal, then within maybe 30 days you can get it back to me? And it created what we eventually put into our new fund. So in our current fund, as we filed the documents with the SEC, we added a best efforts liquidity provision. So in the event that an investor needs their money back for any reason, then they can request it, and we will undertake our best efforts to either redeem the investment or sell it to another investor. And we've had a handful of redemptions so far. They've raised from $9,000 to $300,000. We've always so far been able to meet them within the 30-day request period. And I think that's been a significant driver. The fact that there is some liquidity has been very, very helpful. And again, it's best efforts, so there's no guarantees. Certainly if you had everyone demand their money back at once, we would not be able to do that within 30 days. But as it happens now, it comes sporadically, and it has been very helpful to raising money. The only caveat to that is if the request is made in the first 6 months and is redeemed in the first 6 months, the return drops from 12 to 10. In the second 6 months, it goes from 12 to 11. But that has been, again, very helpful. But back to the just want to help. Really think about that. I mean, people are crowdfunding millions and millions of dollars. I mean, whether it's Kickstarter because they identify with a product or a business, or GoFundMe or some of these other sites where there's just identifying with a cause. And now there's political, politically people are increasingly lately taking sides, and if they see something where, one side needs money for a cause, people are if they're sympathetic to that cause, they're contributing. So that is something that I think is something to tap into and really be cognizant of as we move forward. It's certainly something that we're learning to do. And that's my thoughts. So we've done Regulation A+. We have tried all kinds of marketing ways. Some have failed spectacularly, and some have done really well. We've seen some of our competitors do radio. Rich Uncles does a lot of radio, so we thought, hey, let's try radio. Radio for us, and maybe it's just the stations we picked, we tried on NPR. We didn't get a great response, and it was a notable contrast because I was interviewed on NPR for about 10 minutes, and that was probably our best day of influx of investment dollars ever. But once we started sponsoring NPR radio shows, it was just a trickle of activity. It was really notable how being part of the content was a huge driver, and simply being an ad or a sponsor was not a big driver. We're now our best source of new investors, and this, for me, would seem extraordinary, is podcasts. I've been interviewed on a number of podcasts. We sponsor a number of podcasts, and these are highly targeted listenerships who are interested in investing or impact investing and whatnot, and it's remarkable how many new investors find out of us from podcasts. And then there's Dara's written about us a couple of times on her blog and other stories, Local Investing, I write for Huffington Post. And we poll investors, how do you find out about us? It comes from all different places, 1 here, 10 there, whatnot. But it is although I think we've had some successes, we've certainly had some challenges along the way as we find what resonates and where people feel that they're being sold to, or where they're feeling like they're discovering something that they want to join and be a part of. And that is all that I have. So I'm going to ask if there's any questions. I'm hoping. We had a gentleman here ask me a few hours ago. I spent some years in Ohio, and your strategy, if I understand correctly, is buying unused, unwanted industrial property, either building or redeveloping, and crowdfunding that. And I think a lot of people, the buy American, hire American, and whatnot. If we have a choice, I think most people would hire or buy American, and I think that's something, as the story, there's always a story. How do you tell your story, and how do you get it to resonate with people? And those are things that you can pick up. It's industrial property. Well, it's industrial property, not very sexy, but once you tie it into, hey, we can get these places refurbished, and we can get them ready for companies to go in and start hiring people, then that's solving a bigger social issue that a lot of people can be sympathetic to. Yes?
Do you see yourself needing to pivot because of just the foreclosures working their way through the system? Or, there's always going to be some, not to the magnitude that we've had.
No, that's an excellent question. It comes up all the time from investors. Are you going to be able to still sustain this business on long term on any kind of significant scale? And foreclosures are out of the news. 8 years ago, most of us probably knew friends or family or neighbors who were in foreclosure, and right now that's generally not the case, but there is a huge concentration. Millions and millions of families in these homes in low to moderate income neighborhoods, which are, they owe 100, the home is worth 20, 30, 50. There's no way in their lifetimes that they're ever going to be above water. And also, a lot of banks just aren't foreclosing, so there's a kind of standoff. And most of the families don't like the uncertainty. They'd like to know, hey, if I pay 500, I get to keep my home and eventually own it. So intuitively, you guess there's not going to be a big supply, but for that reason, and where we work in low to moderate income neighborhoods, there is a huge supply to work through, billions and billions and billions of dollars. And also, although the crisis started more or less 2008, many of the biggest banks and GSEs, the government agencies selling these loans, did not start selling in earnest until more or less 2013, 2014. And most of those trades were 100 million, 500 million, a billion, and they've gone to biggest hedge funds on Wall Street, and now they're trickling down to groups like us. So I see that being several years more supply. And like you said, we are even now seeing loans that were originated in 2012 and 2013 that have defaulted that are finding their way to us. So it's the scale of the business is a question, but it's just billions, and we're trying to raise 50 million, so it's really a drop in the bucket. One more question. Go. Many more questions.
I apologize if I missed this, but how much money have you raised in this?
We've raised roughly $5 million, about 10%. I think it's just over $5 million that we've spent on loans, on acquisitions. So it's 9 months into it, and we've done and we started doing the podcast marketing this year, and we started doing the NPR marketing, which didn't work this year. We've been trying to add elements to our site and start marketing more broadly, but it seems like everything always takes quite a bit longer than anticipated. But we want it. Our goal is to get to 50 million, and then which we have 2 years to do. We hopefully won't need the full 2 years.
It's non-trading.
It's not trading. I mean, we're not trying to list. Most people, again, there's liquidity, so we offer liquidity, so they need out. They just come to us. It's not traded or anything like that.
How long were you nonprofit before you went to for-profit?
About 1.5 years, and that was 2008. And our actually goal then was simply a social one, which was to help families at risk of foreclosure would come to us, and we would advocate on their behalf to Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and all the other lenders and servicers. And they would, we were almost ineffective. Maybe 10% of the families would be able to get solutions. The vast majority of them, we'd go through this paper circus where they'd request all these documents and go through this long process, and most of the times, the families did not get any result. And I blame that 100% on the lenders and services, not on the families, because they were generally doing everything they could and everything they were told to do, and they still came out empty-handed.
How do you provide the liquidity?
So we generate a fair amount of cash flow. I mean, 39%. So we're going to do one or two things. If there's cash on hand, we can just redeem it. If there's not cash on hand, we'd undertake whatever we can to sell it to another investor. And
the majority is funding out of your free cash.
Is funded out of free cash. I mean, just to tell you, here's the hit. When we first started on 506C, we put our first offering online. This is October 2013, and we wanted, I think we had some investors who already had experience with us, so they were comfortable investing, but other people were doing this and thinking, well, is this really going to work? Am I going to get my money back? So what we did was we simply said each month, people could come in for 1 year, and they get a 9% return. 2 years, they get a 10% return. 5 years, they get a 12% return. And what we would do is each month, if there was extra money, instead of buying more mortgages, we just return the extra cash to the shortest term class. And what would happen is some of the 1 year investors got paid off in 6 or 7 months. And pretty soon they were saying, now they're comfortable. They're saying, well, I don't want the money back that fast. So that's how we've done it now. And now people are saying, I don't even want my return each month. Just keep it. And so we've slowly tried to accommodate that. But we do generate a fair amount of cash on an ongoing basis. It's in a lumpy fashion, but we do, over time, generate decent cash.
In your offering documents, does it outline a structured redemption program, or is it simply best efforts?
No, it's definitely best efforts, but it is identified in our offering documents. But it's absolutely best efforts.
But it's not necessarily time-driven. Like, I know we have a few clients that do structured redemption programs, and they'll say that they'll do a quarterly redemption if you do this minimum, and they won't redeem more than X% of the outstanding.
No, because it's best efforts, it's easy to say it's best efforts, and there are some parameters. So if there's multiple redemptions and we can't redeem them all in the 30-day period, then they simply go in the sequence that they were received. So there are provisions that what happens if we get too many, what happens if we can't. If we can't redeem it in the 30-day period, it carries over to the next one. So, I mean, I think it's fairly well identified and dictated, disclosed. And I guess what I've just found over the years is that most investors want to know that they can get it out, but most of the time they don't actually need to get it out.
Yes,
And that's
I agree.
general. But whenever someone does, we do everything we can. We want to get it done within that 30-day period because as soon as you don't do it, and you say you do it, and then you can't do it, or you take 6 months to do it, that kind of loses the value of having that provision in there.
Right.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sydney.